Today we're getting into something really fundamental, I think, to how we are. Consciousness and those subjective experiences it creates. Qualia.
It's a fascinating area.
Yeah.
Science is obviously brilliant at explaining the stuff we can observe, measure, using logic, math. But consciousness, it's a different kind of beast, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Because it's inherently subjective. It doesn't neatly fit into those objective boxes we usually use.
Exactly. We can break down a brain, map neurons, track signals, but capturing the feeling, that's the puzzle.
Right. The actual personal sensation. Can logic and science alone ever fully capture, say, what chocolate tastes like to you or how you experience the color blue? It's a question being tackled everywhere from neuroscience labs to AI research and, of course, philosophy.
And qualia is the term for that, isn't it? It sounds technical, maybe, but it's just about those private, sort of ineffable aspects of experience.
Like the warmth of the sun on your skin?
Yeah, or the specific sting of a paper cut, or the sound of a particular voice. They feel very direct, very real to us.
But impossible to truly share, right? You can describe the physics of heat or sound waves, but transmitting the actual sensation, that seems impossible.
That's the core of it. Science can tell us about wavelengths of light, photoreceptor cells, neural pathways. But the experience of seeing blue, that internal quality, that's qualia.
Okay, so that's the mystery. But here's the twist we really want to explore today. These qualia, these deeply personal feelings, are produced by consciousness.
That's it. Consciousness is the filter. Everything we experience, everything we think, every logical deduction we make, it all passes through this filter.
So even our reasoning about qualia is itself a conscious experience.
Right, which means using our conscious reasoning to get a purely objective account of consciousness or qualia might be, well, a bit circular, perhaps. You're using the tool to study the tool.
Yeah, that's a tricky loop. So this brings us to the main question for this deep dive. We see patterns, right? In the world, in our thoughts. Things follow logical sequences. Cause and effect makes sense to us.
We certainly perceive them that way, yes.
Yeah.
Through consciousness.
Okay, so if consciousness is the medium for all this, including our logical thoughts, could consciousness itself operate according to some underlying logical structure? Even if the qualia it generates, the raw feels, don't seem logical in themselves.
That's the crucial tension. We have these subjective experiences, qualia, that feel immediate, personal, maybe even irrational sometimes.
Yeah.
But the system producing them, the system that lets us even think about them, that seems to have some kind of order, some structure we can potentially understand.
Like what neuroscience is trying to do, mapping brain activity to conscious states.
Exactly. They're looking for those consistent correlations. If this pattern of neural firing happens, the person reports this kind of experience. And they're finding many connections, making real progress.
But is knowing the wiring the same as knowing the experience? I mean, you can have the blueprint for a piano, know exactly how the hammers hit the strings.
But that doesn't tell you what Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata feels like to hear. No.
Right. It's a powerful analogy. The map isn't the territory, especially when the territory is subjective feeling.
Which highlights the limits of just looking at the physical correlates. It's essential information, absolutely, but maybe not the whole story for qualia. That's why some are looking at AI.
Artificial intelligence, how does that help?
Well, the idea is if you build systems that process information in incredibly complex ways, maybe you start to see principles emerge that are relevant to how consciousness works, even if the AI doesn't feel anything.
So by simulating complexity, we might learn something about the structure needed for consciousness.
Potentially. But again, there's the caveat. A super smart AI could, in theory, describe seeing red perfectly based on data, patterns, correlations.
Without actually experiencing redness. Like a philosophical zombie, almost.
Precisely. It could be an incredibly sophisticated mimic, which brings philosophy back into the picture very strongly. Maybe consciousness isn't just an emergent property of complex matter.
But something more fundamental.
Perhaps. Some viewpoints suggest it's a basic aspect of reality, and everything else is perceived through it. So trying to study the external world objectively without accounting for the conscious filter is, well, incomplete.
Which kind of puts us back at that boundary, doesn't it? We keep bumping up against our own subjectivity. It's like trying to see your own eyeball without a mirror.
And it raises the question of whether applying strict logic is even the right approach for qualia. We reason about feelings, sure, but the feeling itself often seems to defy neat logical boxes.
Yeah, you can logically analyze why you feel sad, perhaps, but the sadness itself isn't a logical proposition.
And yet, our minds do both things constantly. We reason logically, and we operate on emotion, intuition, things that aren't strictly logical. It suggests consciousness isn't just one thing, one mode of operation. It's multifaceted.
So where do we go from here? How can we possibly get a better handle on this?
Well, one path is definitely more interdisciplinary work, combining that detailed neuroscience, the brain mapping.
With the pattern-finding power of AI.
Exactly. Sifting through massive data sets of brain activity with powerful computational models to find reliable structural signatures, let's say, that correlate with conscious states, finding those sort of islands of structure in the subjective sea.
Islands of logic, maybe?
Perhaps. And this connects to another really interesting idea, the need for potentially new ways of thinking about it all. New languages of thought, you might call them.
Meaning like new math.
Could be. Think about how calculus was developed to describe change, or probability theory for uncertainty. Maybe we need entirely new conceptual tools, new mathematical frameworks, to properly describe the dynamics of qualia and consciousness.
Wow. So our current logic and math might just be insufficient for this particular job.
It's a possibility. The limits we feel might be limits of our current tools, not necessarily limits inherent in consciousness itself.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. We have this fundamental paradox. Consciousness is what we study, but also the only tool we have to study it.
Right. And while neuroscience and AI are making huge strides in mapping connections and identifying patterns,
That raw, subjective, personal quality of experience qualia still feels elusive, hard to pin down with just objective science.
yet the quest continues. Better brain mapping, smarter AI models. These will undoubtedly yield more insights.
And maybe, just maybe, developing these entirely new conceptual frameworks, these new languages, could be the key.
It's a fascinating prospect.
So here's something to think about. What if consciousness, the very filter shaping our reality, actually operates by its own discoverable rules, its own kind of logic, even if the qualia, the experiences themselves, resist that logical capture? What might we understand if we could decode those underlying principles of consciousness itself? It's a huge question, and one that's going to keep people busy for a long, long time. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.